Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Wrestling Underground podcast. I am your host, as always, Chad. Joining me is the glorious one himself, Marcus Green. Marcus, how the hell are you?
Man, we're back. Another Discord.
Another Discord, another dollar, another day. We are working on the audio for things, so it's going to be improved upon even more so in the coming weeks. Hopefully it's good enough tonight. We're going to continue to work on it and see what we can do to make sure that this is the best possible version of the show we can give you. But with that, this is unfortunately what we got for the night. So I hope you bear with us. I hope you enjoy yourselves because we're rocking and we're rolling and we're moving on. So obviously, this is kind of a continuation of last week's show. We talked about Sabu's passing, what he meant to the industry, and I made some comments that I think are fair when it comes to Sabu, his legacy, his reputation, and all that. Um, but what I think sometimes people get lost in the sauce about is when it comes to Sabu and it comes to really any of these ECW guys, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, when we talk about these guys, there's always that latent kind of conversation that comes up of how they're basically left behind in a sense due to failings of previous management and what have you. Um, it's become pretty clear that a lot of people don't seem to realize the impact or the negative impact that we got with guys like Paul Heyman and how he affected people. Well, when Sabu passed away, there was a prevailing idea that perhaps, you know, just perhaps, that maybe we have him, being Paul Heyman, pay for Sabu's funeral and expenses. That makes sense to me. It made sense to a lot of people. Some people are like, no, and that perplexed me. So why do I think Paul Heyman should pay for Sabu's expenses? Well, we famously know that a lot of guys were owed money, for lack of a better term, for Paul Heyman's tenure as ECW owner. Roughly around $700,000 were claimed in bankruptcy filings, but if you ask guys, it could be higher. Shane Douglas was listed, and we'll talk about this more individually here in a second. When it comes to owed money, Shane Douglas is listed as only being owed 48 grand, not nothing. He claims it's closer to 160. So whatever the money is being listed in the bankruptcy, it's clearly not all of it. It's clearly not all of it. Um, So when you look at what when we talk about Sabu and what Heyman owes Sabu, there are some people who will sit here and suggest, along the lines of, well, Sabu wasn't listed as being owed any money, so technically Heyman doesn't owe him anything. That's not entirely true. Heyman missed a lot of payments for Sabu in 2000. In fact, as Sabu himself tells the story, I think it was like 2021. He says that he had a deal to join WCW. He doesn't really mention when in 2000, but it was sometime in 2000. And if you were paying attention to WCW in 2000, and even late into '99, they were going after a lot of the ECW talent. They brought in Shane Douglas at the tail end of even at the start of '99. They brought in Sandman, Mikey Whipwreck. The summer they brought in Shane Douglas. Start of the 2000s, you had guys like Mike Awesome, Lance Storm was a big get. Sabu was supposed to join them, and then eventually they would go on and get Jason Jett, I think, from ECW. I think he had a different name then. And they even had signed Jerry Lynn right before the company went out of business. Now, the way they signed people to contracts, there was two holding companies essentially. There was WCW. They held the contracts for guys like Evan Courageous, Jamie Noble, and what have you. And then you had, Time Warner, and they held contracts for everyone else, like all the bigger names, Sting, Hollywood Hogan, Randy Savage, but even guys like Ernest Miller, Scott Norton, and others. When WCW got bought, most of those contracts had to be honored. And the basic gist was if you sit with this contract, we're not going to use you. You would have to take a buyout to some degree or take a lesser contract. And if you had a contract with WCW's parent company, you would be bought out if you wanted to be, and then you'd be free to work. Now, that was a good thing for Time Warner because let's say they owed a guy, $600,000. They could give him a buyout of about 200,000, get him out of the contract for a lot less, let them go work for the WWE where they're making less, but they're able to, potentially earn more over time. That's the hook. That's the gimmick they try to sell you. Sabu would have been on a Time Warner contract, more than likely. There's debates on, if the number, 450,000 is a lot of money, if that's even true. Lance Storm was on pace to make about that in a given year. Sabu's a bigger name than Lance Storm. I believe it's very likely that Sabu was probably in line to get, that 3-year deal he said he was supposed to get. Now, the reason why that deal came about was because Sabu wasn't getting paid in ECW. So he agreed to take the deal, but then his mother, I think, had a heart attack or a stroke. I can't remember which one. And so he went to take care of her, and a few hours later he called back up and said, let's take the deal. And they said, we can't. Paul Heyman's threatening to sue us for revoking the deal. When you think about the things Paul Heyman has done, I think it's fair to say that the man's a scumbag. AJ
Mm,
Styles himself, I don't know if you remember this, but when the Good Brothers were first
oh,
released around the pandemic, AJ Styles
mm,
called Heyman a bald faced liar.
yeah, I remember. 'Cause he was writing for SmackDown, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, I think so. Then we have, Sabu outright saying, I had a 3-year deal at 450K a pop each year. And whether it was going to be through WCW or Time Warner doesn't really matter. That's a lot of freaking money. And he was going to get paid that one way or another because those contracts have to be honored. You don't buy a company and then just go, well, I don't have to pay you anymore. No, no. Whether it's a Time Warner contract or a WCW contract, the WWE would be on the hook for that contract. These guys didn't have to take a buyout. They didn't have to show up to work. They had a contract. It was guaranteed to them. Now, some guys took the money or allowed themselves to go to the WWE for the potential and the opportunity that came with it. Others were like, screw that. I'm getting paid, $500,000 a year. I'm gonna sit at home and do nothing. Right gig if you can get it. So whether Sabu's numbers were accurate, whether it was going to be a WCW or a Time Warner contract, none of that matters. At the end of the day, Paul Heyman screwed a guy out of getting paid. We sit here and we talk about how, well, hey, Josh Alexander didn't get a contract offer from TNA because TNA knew that AEW and WWE could offer more. All right, cool, cool, cool. Could you imagine if TNA tried to legally or illegally screw Josh Alexander, not pay him, and then threaten to sue whoever signs him? The uproar around that conversation. Like we would hear that for weeks about the shady politics and back room business dealings that TNA was getting involved with and how scummy that is. Yet Paul Heyman did this gleefully. And then WWE made a documentary about how gleefully and how charming Paul Heyman is. Oh, Paul Heyman used to fly us in on bereavement fairs. Isn't he so quirky and funny? The man screwed hundreds of people over. He owes hundreds of thousands of dollars. He prevented guys from getting work, but it doesn't end there. Because and I wish it did, right? I wish we could just sit here and say, well, you know, Paul Heyman, scumbag. But here's just a general gist of money owed. Van Dam believes he's owed within $150,000. Van Dam says he always got paid by Heyman and got paid well. But he also said that Heyman didn't follow through on other aspects of the contract, which were like licensing, pay-per-view buy rates, because he would get a percentage of that. And Van Dam said that he was screwed out of potential earnings, roughly totaling $150,000. Now, apparently, this $150,000 may be an additional $150,000, so he may be looking at more about about 300,000. Heyman's listed himself as being owed $128,000, which is hysterical because he was actually on the WWE payroll at this time before ECW even closed. Tommy Dreamer's owed about $100,000. Joey Styles is owed about $50,000. Rhino was owed about $50,000. Shane Douglas was listed at 48,000, but he thinks the number is closer to 140 odd thousand dollars. Francine was owed 47. Little Guido was owed 25. Roadkill 21. Don Callis 12. Mikey Whipwreck 12,000. Simon Diamond 9,000. Just Incredible 8,000. Don Marie 9,000. Sign Guy Dudley 7,000. Bill Alfonso 5,000. Super Crazy and Tajiri 5,000 apiece. Nova 4,000. Balls Mahoney 4,000. You get the general gist. This dude owed a lot of wrestlers a lot of money, and he didn't pay. And it wasn't just this thing that happened at the end. It was a running problem. Here's the other thing that I think has become so warped. We've come to an ability to weaponize certain things, right? We weaponize, guys going to WCW like, oh, the traitors, Storm and Awesome and all these other guys, Raven, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, they stole him. That's a one night stand document. That's what Heyman said. That's what the WWE really wanted to emphasize. The WCW stole these guys. The WWE signed all these guys. They signed the Dudley Boys. You know? I remember hearing everyone saying that they sold out. Taz jumped ship. Don't remember hearing anything about him selling out. They took just as many guys as WCW, but yet there's no comments about that. And there's a reason for that because Heyman was a WWE wrestler. He was a WWE employee. And to have an actual company sign away his talent made him look bad because it showed that he couldn't afford to pay his guys and that these guys were leaving in droves because they were being screwed. When WWE signed a guy, there was rumors, unfounded or otherwise, that Heyman got some type of bonus. So of course he would incentivize people going to the WWE because he would make more money then, if the rumor's true. Now again, that's just a rumor, and who knows if who's telling the truth on this one. But I think the next two stories really kind of capitulate any real argument. I think you'd have to agree that at this point, he's a scumbag. And when you talk about things like paying Sabu's funeral expenses, I don't just think he should pay for Sabu's funeral expenses. Like this man he owned a company at one point. It was like some type of media company. I remember him like talking about the models he's hired or something like that, like in like 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. He has a lot of money. He's made a lot of money in the WWE. I don't know if he can afford to pay out $800,000 in owed money minimum, but it'd be nice instead of just being like, just get over it, get over it. It's easy to tell people to get over it when you're raking in the money and everyone else that you screwed over is struggling to make ends meet. Yeah, it's easy. It's easy to tell other people to get over it, but in actuality, it's not easy to get over it. Not when you're owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we know the story of Mike Awesome. ECW champion, hop ship to WCW Wild champion. Joey Styles says on commentary, 4 years later, 5 years later, I hope he breaks his fucking neck. He screwed us. He was the champion. He's being paid a lot of money, yada, yada, yada. And they paint the story of Mike Awesome being this villain. How could he leave poor Paul Heyman and the little extreme nerds and go to the big bad WCW? What they don't tell you is Mike Awesome was making six figures in Japan. And he took a deal because he wanted to be home closer to his family and to work with ECW, a deal that paid him a little bit less, but the idea was that he'd be home more often. Only to find out that his payments weren't actually coming. He was losing money, and Heyman was stiffing him week after week after week. Finally, Heyman sat him down and said, here's a contract, sign this, and you'll get your money. And Austin's like, I'm not signing anything until I get the money you already owe me. And this is when he's already champion. Heyman refuses to pay him the back owed money. So Awesome takes a contract with WCW to get paid. He wasn't getting paid and he was breaking his body, and yet we all, were told that he was some villain. He was this mean person. He left when he was champion. And so that's what the discourse was. Lance Storm talked about Mike Awesome on his blog, stormwrestling.com. Blogs were huge before social media. When Mike Awesome took his own life, Lance Storm wrote a heartfelt piece about it. This is what he said about Mike on his personal website, stormwrestling.com. Mike got a lot of heat for the way he left ECW, but a lot of that was unjustified. The true story is that Mike was owed a significant amount of money from ECW and he refused to sign his contract until he received all money due to him. After repeatedly not receiving money promised him, Mike accepted an offer from WCW that offered his family financial security. I'm not sure there is anyone in this business that would have done differently. I followed Mike to WCW not too long after, and we were again able to work together. We first feuded over the U.S. and Canadian heavyweight title, and then Mike later joined my version of Team Canada. Mike and I were on the verge of capturing the WCW World Tag Team titles when the WWF purchased WCW. Mike and I teamed together on the final Nitro broadcast. When you think about Lance Storm, pretty respectable guy, right? When he sits there and says, yeah, he was owed a lot of money that Paul Heyman never paid him. And then Paul Heyman backs a documentary that paints him like he's like Awesome, some kind of piece of shit. Joey Styles is under the impression that Mike Awesome is this horrible human being and wishes death upon him on ECW One Night Stand 2005. And that influences a lot of people's perceptions. They're the voice of the conversation, so obviously that's the truth. That's the reality of the situation. But is it? Doesn't seem so. That takes us to our final point of contention here. Chris Candido. He was another guy that jumped ship from WCW in 2000. Do you want to know why Chris Candido jumped ship? Because this is horrifying. I didn't know this. Apparently, we all know about the fun ha ha gimmick. Well, Paul Heyman was so broken poor that he would fly guys in on bereavement flights. Like, ha 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 ha. Ron Simmons laughed about it. Chris Jericho made snarky comments. It's so witty and funny. Oh. Chris Candido was buying these flights out of his own pocket. Apparently, to the tune of $168,000. Him and Tammy Lynn Sitch, aka Sonny, were going into deep debt to finance ECW for Paul Heyman. Like, that's sick. It got to a point, Marcus, where Paul Heyman would not grant his release and was even threatening to fire him unless he agreed to sign a statement saying that he would not sue Paul Heyman for the money owed to him in order for him to go to WCW. He agrees. I don't know why he agreed. Candido and Tammy Lynn were apparently doing a lot of drugs in 2000, if the rumors are to be believed, so maybe he was under the influence, who knows. But Candido ended up having to sell his house to pay off the debts owed. Meaning, Candido walks into WCW without a house, all to get out of the debt he owes. And then, sadly for him, 3 months later, give or take, he'd end up getting fired from WCW, uh, due in part to Tammy Lynn's behavior and possibly some type of substance issues. Although I'm not too familiar with the actual reason why, it's just the rumors that circle around it. So essentially,
Yeah.
Candido got stuck with a nearly $200,000 bill that he never got recouped from, all at Paul Heyman's behest. And when Candido wanted to make money finally, Heyman basically said, fuck you. You're not getting paid a dime, and you can't sue me for it. Otherwise, you're going to continue to lose money.
I
The the
would imagine that
depravity.
obviously a deceased man can't sue, and I don't think Tammy Lynn was going to take up that fight.
No, Tammy Lynn didn't have the money to take up that fight. Candido actually forgave Paul. Heading into 2005, he was with TNA. I doubt he was making a lot of money, but he was making enough. He was happy. He was a big aspect of the company at the time. He was managing and also still wrestling. He was managing the Naturals, and he actually led them to their first, maybe not first, their first tag team title run in 2005 at least, and helped elevate them to the next level within the company. Uh, but also he broke his leg, a couple nights before. And so when he flew, he developed a blood clot, I think, in his leg that traveled to his heart and killed him the way home. So sadly, Chris Candido never really got to see, how his career could have gone clean, sober, and in a company that wanted to use him properly. So unfortunately, his legacy kind of ends, you know, sadly in a lot of ways. And people like Paul Heyman continue to profit off of legacies that were built by other people that he's, swallowed whole. And when I see people kind of, love on Paul Heyman, talk about how great he is, I see him for what he is as a con man. And if it wasn't for the WWE's, public relations machine that they called documentaries, I don't think anyone would see Paul Heyman in a positive light. This man owes so much money to people. He takes credit for so many other people's ideas. And he sits there and he paints himself as this rebellious, genius, when in actuality, all he really was the dude who sat by, let other people talk, and said, "Yeah, it's a good idea. You should do that." You have people like Raven and Dreamer and so many others who came up with these grand ideas in the backstage area because they were given the freedom and creativity to do so. And then people are like, Paul Heyman's a creative genius. And I'm like, well, right? What? Really? If you let other people do whatever they want, I don't think you get to call them or yourself. I don't think you get to call yourself a genius because you're capitalizing off of their own talents. And to be clear, most of ECW was unwatchable. The stuff that was good was very good. But we always talk about the same moments from the same years. There's not a lot of like, oh, remember this, remember this deep cut? There wasn't really any. It was either all very good or very bad. There's very little in between. And I think Heyman's gotten away with this aspect of being, a genius, a rebel, but all the while he was just, leaning off of other people's better ideas and then getting paid by the companies he was supposedly, trying to take down. When you're on the WWE payroll for as many years as he was before, his company went under, it's hard for me to sit here and see you as the rebel,
Yeah,
leader that you claim yourself to be.
yeah, it's definitely interesting because what you had said before, like a lot of those guys got what criticized for jumping ship.
Oh yeah, they got criticized for jumping ship to WCW. WCW was always painted off as the villain, the bad guys. But in actuality, like they were going to make money. This is a industry. These guys are making a living. Of course, they're going to leave for better money and better opportunities.
Yeah, I mean it speaks to like a formula I just came up with as you were going through all that, and it kind of be basically summed up in three things as we've been talking about in a lot of different ways from different talent across the industry, but specifically in this situation, like you have the criticize them for jumping ship when they go to the company, or the big kahuna, if you will, to your point about, the IWC, they fed them, and then because they're in that company that they fetishize so much, they then romanticize them. And I think that's what they did with Heyman, but we see that with a lot of guys. Don't know who they is before they come to WWE. The best thing since sliced bread when they come to WWE, even though by the time they get to WWE, their prime is behind them and all their best time was in another company. But they romanticize it because now they're in WWE and they got pyro and this, that, and the third. And so it's definitely a huge thing. But I also feel like not even knowing a lot of Paul Heyman stories, like I feel like he's thrown that that version of himself in people's faces like a joke at times
Hmm.
when it comes to the whole ECW thing, which is weird, but it's kind of like when a guy's like you said, if a guy's pressing you for money and you're telling him like screw you, you're not gonna get a dime, and then he passes away, well, he really can't be a problem now. Even if he was in the right, and even if he, you basically was trying to get him to call your bluff, hoping that he'd back off, and he wouldn't back off. But if he's no longer here to keep pressing you, the problem literally goes away. So yeah, I mean it sucks, but Heyman is just kind of a long line of guys, particularly in WWE, who kind of have that unfortunate background. Has done some good stuff for people and whatnot, and what have you. And Cody told that story in the ring with Heyman about him and his family being on some real serious hard financial times, and him calling Dusty to come work. I think for ECW or something to that effect, uh, and paid him the good enough wage that really helped his family out. But for every step forward, there's behavior that takes him two steps back. But again, this time in WWE, he's been so romanticized that I think a lot of people will either just hated it out of their memory or they just don't want to acknowledge it. Not at all too dissimilar from what we talk about a lot of times when we reference an Orton.
I think that's an interesting conversation to bring up when you mention Dusty, because yeah, it sounds great on paper. Like, oh yeah, I gave Dusty work when he was broke and needed money. But in actuality, he paid Dusty less than what he was making in WCW. He had him do a lot of violent shit that at 50 years old at the time he shouldn't have been doing. And he really profited off of using Dusty in ways that I doubt Dusty actually saw the benefit of. You could easily view this as Paul Heyman taking advantage of Dusty's misfortune and getting Dusty to agree to things that maybe normally he wouldn't have done, or maybe at his age he shouldn't have done. Because if I remember correctly, he did a violent dog collar match with Steve Corino, and Dusty had to be like 50 years old,
Right.
right? Dusty would have been 55. So like it kind of puts things in a little bit into perspective, right? He brought this dude
Yeah,
in
man.
who
Then
was
then having
well, he brought in this
go
dude
ahead.
who's 55 years old. He's severely overweight, probably has multiple health ailments. And he's like, Dusty, what we want you to do something with Steve Corino. Dog collar match. It'll be great. But then has the audacity 10 years later to say, I wouldn't join TNA unless I could fire everyone over 40. He's a hypocrite and a scumbag. He took advantage of Dusty Rhodes and painted it as a sweet story about how he gave Dusty, the American Dream, a job when he was down and out. WCW, meanwhile, signs Dusty back, I think, in November of that year. So, like, how much did he actually help Dusty? It's a cute story and one I'm sure the WWE really wanted Cody to tell to really like make it seem like Paul Heyman's this good guy. But I don't think Paul Heyman has a good bone in his body. I don't like him. Never have. He's always screamed con man to me. And the more stories that come out about him over the years, and his views on people, and the way he just dismisses people who didn't have, who were screwed out of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars by him, how he's refusing to pay them even till this day. And I was just like, get over it. What a scumbag. You've ruined lives.
Yeah,
Fuck you.
yeah, and you know, being on the Titanic as it's sinking, and then seemingly jump into a pretty big buoy with WWE, it does kind of seem kind of like you said shady. Basically, basically telling everybody like you either go down with the ship or you jump ship. Like you said, take less for the potential promise for more, which oftentimes is just something that gets put out in the ether. Um, but also real quick, because you oftentimes get the bird's eye view for this. Um, who do you think of all the guys he stood next to in terms of performance that he did the most for, or which guy you think did the most for him, um, or who you think benefited from being by him the least, if not end up career ended up being far more and more detriment because they were put with him. I guess you could say the best would be Lesnar, and I guess the worst would be what like somebody like Curtis Axel.
As
What do
far
you
as a
think about
manager goes, yeah, I think you could make a real strong case that Brock Lesnar benefited the most from. I would argue more so Roman Reigns. Brock was always a great in-ring performer when he was in the company the first time around, and he actually developed into a solid promo near the end of his first run. Whatever you want to say about Roman, the truth is he's not a great worker, very limited, doesn't do a lot of things, not a great promo, only has one note. Having someone like Heyman saved his career. As far as who did the least with him, Curtis Axel and Ryback clearly stand out. Was Ryback part? Was Curtis Axel tagging with Ryback as Paul Heyman guys? Rybacksel, remember that?
Oh wow, yeah. I was
I don't know if Ryback was a Paul Heyman guy.
Yeah, me neither. I think because they just did some weird. They double dribbled the hell out of that guy's career.
Yeah, they
But
did.
it's weird. I mean, he turned out to be a bit of a tool, but yeah. Um, I want to say because who was he? Else was with him when he was back in? Was it just? I think he was there with Brock when After was on, and just you know, Brock was there semi regularly. So, but yeah, he never recovered. I think Heyman mentioned like that's one of his biggest regrets because he felt like he wished he could have did more for him or it would have benefited him more. But you know, um, and maybe you know, like you said, Roman probably benefited from him the most because he was coming off of just absolute trash, and then with Braun's another guy who doesn't necessarily need somebody in a way. He's okay on the mic, but so much of Braun, much like Lesnar, perception back in the day, he don't really need to say nothing. He kind of shows up, kills, and he leaves. So,
That's fair. As far as who he helped and hurt the most as a promoter, I think it's Candido and then Tommy Dreamer. One and two as the people he hurt the most because Dreamer was owed $100,000, give or take, and Heyman stuck him with a car loan. Dreamer was on the hook for a $15,000 car. $15,000 for a car in 2000 is a lot of money. As far as helped,
yeah.
I would say the Sandman, Hack Sandman, whatever you want to call him, was a surfer gimmick, hence the name the Sandman. And he developed this more edgier persona under the Paul Heyman's supervision. And he's one of the worst wrestlers I've ever seen in my life. And yet Heyman
Hmm.
made him into a headlining star. I'll give him that. He really let Sandman shine in ways no one else could.
Yeah. And because by the time we got One Night Stand, the WWE had like fully purchased ECW, correct?
Yeah, they bought the IP and some contracts and the video library, not the debt necessarily, I think, in 2001. So like they would have a few contracts, like guys like Rhino came over. Obviously Van Dam and Dreamer showed up in the summer. The title belts, the video library, but there were some other aspects of the company they did not buy at the time. But yeah, for the most part, they bought ECW in 2001.
Uh, Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, I think I said before that really was supposed to be a one night thing, and then obviously turned it into something else. But what do you think of how much do you know that Heyman was, I guess, involved, and how much of that show got put together?
The One Night Stand 2005, I think
Yeah,
considerably. I don't know if he was, because I know it was Rob Van Dam's idea. Again, like not Paul Heyman's idea, it's Van Dam's. So I don't know if Van Dam did most of the booking himself and most of the stories himself, but I know Heyman was involved because he was the producer on the night. When he came out to do his speech, he came out with the headphones on that guys in the back have, who are basically the director of the show. So I know he had
yeah,
some significant hand in it. To what degree, I don't know. I know it's pretty big.
got you.
Speaking of pretty big, one of the shows that we like to talk about a lot is MLW. I'm a big MLW fan. I think if we were to rank my favorites, it's TNA, even though I am not happy with the direction of the company. But I've not been happy with the direction of the company several times since 2002. I'm a fan. I'm always going to like what they're doing, and I'm going to criticize them freely and fully. But number two, I think, would be MLW. I enjoy MLW. I enjoy their specific blend of chaos. I like that it feels like I'm watching 1995 WWF, but with better talent. Um, Big fan of their roster. Even when they turn over talents, they usually end up finding guys that fit very well. They brought in guys like Akira, Ricky Shane Page, Alexander Hammerstone, Richard Holiday, Myron Reed. They helped get guys like MJF and Darby Allin and Swerve Strickland in front of eyes of AEW and WWE to get signed. They are a very good outlet, and I feel like they are not in the same style, but I think in the same vein as what Ring of Honor was in 2005, 2006, where they're developing the next crop of guys that people want to see get signed. So it's fun to watch them. But the news came out today that apparently MLW is going to be experiencing a little bit of a roster overhaul. I don't know if this can be seen clearly. According to this a little bit, according to MLW, not MLW, according to Mike Johnson, the PW Insider, MLW is expected to go through a roster refresh over the next several weeks. This is coming off the heels of Janae Kai departing the company, who is arguably their best women's champion of all time. This opens up the door, I hope, desperately so, for TNA to sign her, because I think Masha's a dud as a champion right now. She doesn't have anyone working with her to actually make her stand out. With Killer Kelly being out for the foreseeable however long, if she'll ever come back at this point to TNA, I feel like you don't have anyone who can bring out the best in Masha. Janae Kai might be able to do that, and if not, she might be able to take the belt off of Masha and actually be a star in her own right. The other big news is that Alex Kane, former MLW World Champion, is expected to bring his run with the company to an end. And if that's to be said, Kane would be huge in TNA. They so desperately need better talent. I mentioned on Twitter that they lost Mike DeVecchio. I think I'm saying his name right. The European wrestler that they signed a couple years ago when they landed Harley Hudson and Leon Slater. They also signed him. He's expected to end up in WB's developmental territory sooner rather than later. You need to replace him. You lost Hammerstone. You got to replace Hammerstone. You lost Gresham. You got to replace Gresham. You lost Speedball. I don't know if you can, but you got to replace Speedball. They're losing. They lost Alexander. They didn't even offer him a contract offer. Like they're losing so many guys, and I feel like the only way to rebuild yourself at this point is to ensure that you're getting talent from elsewhere. And I think Mance Warner's a great get. Bringing over Harley Hudson finally was a smart idea. I think if you were able to land Janae Kai and Alex Kane, I think that's a hell of a start. I think it's the right way to go
Yeah,
as far as rebuilding your roster. But this also means that
Yeah.
MLW will have to
And
refresh some things.
anybody from the last set of WWE releases, like I mean, obviously they got Indy Hartwell. You had called him to do that.
I think Indy
Called
Hartwell
for him
once
to do that.
once she's cleared, I think Indy Hartwell would be great with Steph Delander. They're both from Australia. They're actually former tag team wrestlers together in Australia. They're genuine friends,
Yeah.
and I think Steph Delander helped
Yeah.
get Indy in TNA. Of all the releases, I think the only two that really make any sense is one, Bea Priestley, because she's that talented, and two, only because of his size and name, Braun Strowman. I don't like Braun,
Mm,
but if you put Braun in a TNA ring, I think you'll have some people who really take notice, and you might be able to do some fun stuff with him. Now, he's 42, I think. He's never hit the type of success that people expected him to. And I think if you were able to find a new way to present him, you might be able to get him over successfully with this TNA crowd on a limited schedule where he's not having to wrestle every time, meaning he can get his hips worked on, his knees worked on, and he can bounce back from all the pressures of being on the road as often as he was with WWE. He won't make as much, but he'll be able to heal and work more efficiently in TNA. Again, not a fan of the guy, but he makes sense. He's an attraction. But outside of that, I think you look at Kane and Janae Kai, Ringo Loco, who worked a little bit at MLW and also with GCW. He did the tapings recently and had a match that aired on Explosion this week. He could be someone that they sign full time, which I think would be a nice get for TNA. But they need to get guys, and if MLW is going to refresh the roster and let some guys go, I think TNA needs to be looking at who gets let go because there's some opportunities there. If Kira gets let go, TNA needs to smother that dude. He'd be a hardcore X Division psychopath. It would be fantastic. And I think they need to really think about landing on some of these guys if MLW is going to move on from them. Now, for MLW fans, the report is stating that they are going to bring in bigger names on a more consistent basis because they're going to run a couple less shows per year. So they'll be able to have the money to afford to bring in bigger names. Who that is, don't know. It could be Baron Corbin, not exactly a big name, but it does seem to be an idea. It could be Braun Strowman. I don't know who they're planning on bringing in, but I do know that they're going forward in that regards. And their next big headline is going to be Matt Riddle against Kenta for the MLW World Championship.
mm.
So we could be
Don't like
seeing.
Riddle, but yeah,
Yeah, it could be a good
we'll bring
match. Yeah, I know exactly where you're going. Yeah, we don't like Riddle, but Riddle versus Kenta could be a lot of fun.
that go. And they've shown in the past they've been able to pull some pretty big names. Even somebody like Mark Henry passing through.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing they could stick at. Um, yeah, definitely team they need to look at the Nakai. If she did was up for grabs, I mean, she obviously up for grabs whenever I guess she gets free from the 90 days or whatever. What do you think somebody like a Dakota Kai would work better, TNA or MLW?
Dakota Kai's a nice hand. I don't know if she's got the personality to warrant a
Yeah,
spot on a company like TNA or even MLW. Um, she's a good hand. She is, but she's also, got rough knees. I don't know if she's the same worker she is now that she was 5 years ago because she's had a few knee injuries. And then you look at the
yeah,
fact that she's never
yeah,
really known for being a bombastic personality. And we have to be honest, bombastic personalities sell far better than workers. And TNA needs bombastic personality. She would do well in
yeah.
MLW. And if Shimmer comes back, she would do great in Shimmer. But I don't know where I see her landing at this point. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously you're a champion of both, but over under for again, we said this when she initially won the belt, she was gonna suffer unfortunately from the same thing that Grace suffered from when she was knockout champion was like the best champion with the worst competition. Um, but over under for you, what does she need more now? An opponent that's I mean, obviously you're an advocate for a character that's also good in the ring. But does she need somebody that pops off the screen? Turn for Monster or somebody that can really bang with her in the ring that's not Tessa. So I was gonna potentially see what you feel about somebody like a Shayna passing through. Not necessarily getting signed, but maybe passing through.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think TNA needs to avoid doing is doing that passing through. Um, Shanna Baszler's fine. I was never a fan of hers. I always thought she was pretty limited in the ring, and I never was impressed with anything she's ever done. She's stiff. She's not as nimble or as athletic as people wanted to make her out to be. She's a little slow, a little prodding. One of the reasons why I think people got really excited for Ronda Rousey is because she was snap quick. Like she made, very quick decisions. Physically, she was very nimble. She had great footwork. It seemed like she always knew where to be in the ring. Shayna is like the intelligence of Ronda Rousey as a wrestler, but lacking the physical attributes. And I don't know if that's something
Mm.
to invest in. I think what TNA needs to do is, they've signed a few names. Maggie Grace, I think, is one of them. There's a handful
Yeah.
of others that they recently signed. I think it's time to just send the NXT talent home. I don't care if you sign 10 people for the bare minimum who no one's ever heard of. Sign them, get them on TV, build them, and actually start developing them. And I think that's what you need to do with the knockouts division. You need to go in there. You need to have Maggie Lee or Maggie Grace, whatever her name is. You need to have some of these other knockouts names go through the trials and tribulations of facing Tessa and Masha and whomever else, Rosemary, build them up, and then start having them be the next feuds for Masha in the long term. That's how you develop and build a champion, not just how many wins she has, but who does she help elevate on her way up and out. Jordan Grace didn't do any of that. Not to her fault. I'm not saying Jordan Grace was on didn't want to work with people. Jordan Grace was given people who aren't going to succeed in wrestling. That's the unfortunate byproduct of Jordan Grace during her last run with TNA. She was given just so many women who aren't that talented or who ended up getting cut. And her reign was lacking. It felt unimpressive, unimpactful. So I think if you really want to find success with Masha's title run, you need to build up talent around her that isn't just passing through like NXT talent or like people like Shayna Baszler. If you're gonna sign people, that's fine. Sign people, but use them, right? That's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Like you said, the passing through thing is kind of passe. What she does, like I said, I was just looking at that as like potentially elevated competition physically. Obviously, she had a run for money with Tesla. That's kind of where it kind of peaked out of TNA at the moment. And I don't think anybody has been cheering for Tesla to take the belt. It looked like that's where they were potentially going, but I think they made the better, wiser decision because I think obviously there's more of an incentive for I think somebody like Martha to stay as well if she's champion because they can't afford to lose anybody else that's that good on the roster. So, like you said, just build up the younger talent. They might. Would you move Tessa real quick into the in to the tag team division for the time being? Since
Yes.
I didn't even, I guess I got to get on Impact because they potentially breaking up Spitfire. I'm like, what?
So Spitfire's gonna have a match with the Elegance Committee one more time. Though, if Spitfire loses, they're gonna disband. I think that's stupid as shit. Now, some people are like, that's a great idea. You could then, build new tag teams. That seems like you're tearing down a bridge to build housing. Cool, you still need to rebuild the bridge. You don't just tear down the only good tag team you have because you want to quote unquote make new tag teams. Make new tag teams and keep Spitfire. I don't understand this desire to break up their only good tag team. Like Spitfire's been great for them. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I don't agree. They just work. They just work better together right now. Um, So yeah, so we'll see how that turns out, but I wouldn't break them up either. Um, but yeah, shout out to MLW, man. They've been just solid. Whether they also have been kind of modulating in those, one, two, three spots or what have you. But even with the mass exodus that we talked about, feels like a couple years ago or whatnot, they still found a way to bounce back. And some of the names they brought back in, we weren't necessarily over the moon about, but they made it work, like the Riddles and some other names. So, um, and like we said, unfortunately, you know, talk about how WWE double dribble Ryback. Feel like TNA did the same thing with Hammerstone, but probably worse because we didn't, at least Ryback had semblances of multiple runs. We didn't even get that with Hammerstone, but he's fitting back 100% perfect in MLW, which is great to see. But it's unfortunate because it's like y'all couldn't find what to do. But again, I guess it's like we always like everybody's not going to work everywhere. But that was it seemed like too good of a get to kind of let go as soon as they did. So
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Now, MLW does have a great little roster going on. You got Mystico, Hammerstone, Kenta. I'm a fan of Mads Kruger. Dijak's been pretty good for them. Baron Corbin, Bishop Dyer, he's a part of the crew. Matthew Justice is a name to watch. Templario, I've gushed about this dude before. They have Baba Tunde as Baba Thunder, but he's only made a couple appearances. Brock Anderson's looked pretty good since joining the company. BRG, Brett Ryan Goslin has been a treat to watch, and they're starting to build their women's division. They got Miyu Yamashita, Himawari, Dalmi Exo. Obviously Janae Kai is no longer with the company, but they are starting to really flush out some guys and gals. Um, I'm curious to see who's going to be let go of and who's moving on. But I will say that I think they've done a good job constantly refreshing the roster. And ironically enough, you know who just recently joined their company? I think two shows ago. Austin Aries. He wrestled for MLW a few times. He's back now as a color commentator, and he's actually been pretty good. I know he's not exactly the nicest guy, and he has a history of being hard to deal with. But I think as just as a talent, I think he's done pretty well. Plus, they have Paul Walter out, and I like Paul Walter. All right, let's see. That takes us to the news that they're launching or possibly launching NXT Europe because NXT UK worked so well the first time. Marcus, I don't know. They, as the one tweet says, they have Raw, SmackDown, NXT Evolve, now AAA, plus monthly events, Saturday Night main event, and NXT major events, plus TNA in essence being a feeder system now. What's your thoughts on an NXT Europe? Do you think it's a good idea? Lost Marks momentarily.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, it's like I always say about them. I've kind of coined as their motto that they never really say. They just kind of it's more of a show and not tell. Is that more is more, not less.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that thing of they try to corner all the marks. I don't know why they would run that back when I feel like UK would have been a peak of this expansion, and that they kind of ran that draw. They even came out with the best belts out of that iteration, and to the point where they had the legendary Satomura, Michael Satomura. So and that still ended up folding. Like we talked about, they took the best and left the rest, and then that is what it is. I don't know what they're getting out of what the idea is, besides again just powering more of the market when you have Evolve and then LFG and then obviously NXT, which is geared more towards being the third brand, but it's still obviously the top version of their training ground. Then, like you said, they're unfortunately using TNA as a feeder system, so it's like wrestling gluttony. Weird.
It is weird. It's
Um,
another attempt for them, I think, to monopolize the industry and to ensure that whatever talent the world has flows through them eventually. It's great
yeah,
for their branding. It's bad for the industry. Look at mixed martial arts. There is no viable number two because of the terrible business practices, or great if you want, that the UFC has kind of gone into. They've really ensured that it's nearly impossible for anyone to come into the sphere and to start a company that can compete with them. The WWE wants to do the
because
same thing.
Bellator is not right.
Bellator is dead. Yeah, Bellator doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
Um, they were essentially squeezed dry, and one championship ended up buying them. And one championship isn't doing. No, I'm sorry, not one championship. PFL bought Bellator, and neither one championship Ryzen out of Japan or PFL are doing all that well financially at the moment. I think that the next they're profitable is, but I wouldn't say they're globally well known. That's KSW. They run shows exclusively, I think, in Poland, and they're super popular in Poland. They sell out 20,000 seat arenas, but they're not moving the needle for international viewers. That's part of the reason why TKO wanted WWE's, because they see that WWE could do the same thing that UFC has done, and that's great for them as a bottom line, rights and shareholders and all that. But it's terrible for the audience and for the industry as a whole. NXT Europe is a bad idea. It's going to kill the European scene just like the UK company did for the UK scene. We're only now seeing the UK fandom come back, not fandom so much, but the love affair for UK wrestling come back to where it was post or pre NXT UK levels. So I'm worried about what this would be as seen for as a nod in the general wrestling sphere, whether it be good or bad. I can't help but think that an NXT Europe would just be bad. They'll sign a bunch of guys that European fans want to see. They'll monopolize the region. They'll squeeze out smaller promotions and turn them into nothing. And then when they get tired of playing with their new toys and do mass releases, there won't be anywhere for these guys to work because they took all the talent that were drawing fans in the first place from these smaller promotions. It's bad news bears all around, man. I'm not
yeah,
excited
it's
about
like
this.
yeah, it's like wrestling terraforming.
Yeah, I think gentrification is a good way to describe it. It's wrestling gentrification.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna come in and decimate your thing, and then put all our stuff in the thing. Yeah, yeah, but it's yeah, but again, like you said, narratively, you know, uh, it's gonna get romanticized. Like you said, they got the AAA thing. Not to mention the damn WWID program stuff that they still don't, that they started up. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, man, it's for the the evil old man no longer being there. A lot of that spirit is still very much in play.
On the plus side, King of the Hill is getting ready to come back. It's not all bad.
Indeed. Looking, looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing what good old what it is, Joseph, where he's there with it, and seeing if Bobby's got a job, or you know, um, what's going on with young Hank, young baby Hank, what he's been up to. I don't know. I don't know what the time skip will be like with that. Yeah, that's gonna be interesting.
I'm excited for it. I'm hoping it turns out well. But I think that'll do it for us though tonight. Marcus, any final thoughts on anything?
Well, good here.
Okay. Be sure to follow us on the website, realnerdcorp.com, REALNERDCRP.com. We're on Twitter at NERDCRP. Marcus, you can be found on Twitter at ParadoxKid, PARADOXKID.
That's me.
You can also find him on his other podcast, The True Penny Show, TRUEPENNS8. Wait, TRUEPENNYSHOW. They talk a lot of
Hey,
international stuff, so check them out. I think you guys are covering the best of the Super Juniors currently.
yeah,
Ninja Mac has been stealing the internet. God
yeah,
bless that
yo,
man.
man, that doggone infinity backflip.
It's incredible. You can also find Marcus on his other. Nope, already mentioned that. You can find me on Twitter at ChadNerdCorp, CHEDNERDCORP, or on the Instagram at Chad's Photo at CHEDSPHOTOHUT. Be sure to follow us again on the website at realnerdcorp.com. We're on Twitter and YouTube at The Wrestling Underground. Check us there. We record live on Twitch. We upload everything to YouTube, so check us out. We'll be back next week. Don't know what the topic is yet. We'll figure something out. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for giving us a chance. Remember, as always, to watch more wrestling. Marcus, take us home.
Good night.